I stood in the kitchen doorway for a moment before anyone noticed I was there. The table was full. Every seat taken, my son-in-law at the head, my daughter beside him, already laughing at something he'd said. Their kids spread across the middle. My son on the far end, eyes down on his phone. And me, they had pulled a chair from the laundry room and set it at the corner where the garage door opens, where the draft comes in every time someone moves a car, where you can smell the motor oil and the damp concrete even in summer. Nobody said, "Mom, we saved you a spot." Nobody stood up. Nobody moved over even 1 inch. I looked at that chair and I thought, so this is who I am to them now. I sat down, I smiled. I passed the rolls when they were handed to me. I said thank you when they sang. I cut my own cake. I drove myself home at 8:30 because the conversation had moved on without me the way a river forgets the shore. And that night, sitting at my own kitchen table with a cup of chamomile tea going cold beside me, I opened my banking app. Just to check something. Just a routine thing I did on the first of every month. What I found stopped me completely still. My name is Loretta. Most people who have known me a long time call me Rhett. I grew up in Amarillo, Texas, the third of 4 daughters to a man who drove a bread truck and a woman who ironed other people's clothes for 31 years and never once complained about it out loud. We were not poor exactly, but we knew the weight of money the way you know the weight of water, always present, always pressing. I married young, too young if I'm honest about it now. I was 22 and James was 26 and he had a steady job at a sheet metal company and he liked the way I made biscuits from scratch, and I suppose in 1982 in Amarillo, Texas, that was enough of a reason. We had 2 children within 4 years, my daughter Brenda and my son Carl, and I did what I was raised to do. I built a home, I made a life. I put everything I had into those 2 children. James and I divorced when Brenda was 11 and Carl was 9. I won't go into all of it. There are things that happen behind closed doors that you carry for decades, and they become part of the architecture of who you are, but they don't need to be spoken out loud to every stranger who passes by. What I will say is that after the divorce, I raised those children alone for 11 years. I worked as a bookkeeper for a dental practice during the day, and on Friday and Saturday nights, I served tables at a steakhouse on the interstate. I wore my good shoes to the dental office and my bad feet home from the restaurant, and I never once asked either of my children to do without something they needed. I remarried when Carl was 20. His name was Douglas, a quiet man, a kind man, a retired postal worker from Lubbock who had lost his first wife to ovarian cancer and who loved crossword puzzles and black coffee and driving with the windows down. We had 14 good years together before the Lord took him with a heart attack in the driveway one January morning. He was carrying a box of old National Geographics to the curb for recycling, and he was gone before the paramedics arrived. That was 7 years ago. I have lived alone since then. I own my house, paid it off in 2019. It is a small house, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen that looks out over a pecan tree in the backyard. Douglas planted that tree. I water it every summer like I'm watering a piece of him. The house is mine outright, and I have a modest retirement account from 32 years of working and a Social Security check that comes on the 3rd of every month. I am not wealthy, but I am not helpless. I never have been. I tell you all of this so you understand who was sitting in that chair by the garage door. Not a woman who wandered in from nowhere. Not a charity case. Not someone whose memory is slipping or whose judgment can't be trusted. I am a 64-year-old woman who worked her entire adult life, raised 2 children on her own, paid her taxes, kept her promises, and never once asked anyone to carry what she could carry herself. That is who they sat next to the garage door. For a long time, I believed in family the way other people believe in gravity. Not because someone proved it to me every day, but because the alternative, not believing, seemed like a way of agreeing to fall. I was the kind of mother who showed up. That sounds simple. It is not simple. Showing up is the whole job. It means driving 45 minutes to watch a middle school volleyball game on a Tuesday night when your feet hurt and you still have invoices to process before morning. It means sitting in a waiting room for 3 hours while your daughter has her wisdom teeth pulled, even though she's 26 and lives 20 minutes from the oral surgeon's office and told you she'd be fine. It means answering the phone at 11 o'clock on a Wednesday because your son's truck broke down on the interstate, and the tow truck won't arrive for 40 minutes, and he just needs to hear a voice. I was there, I was always there, and I gave without keeping track. That was the rule I gave myself, no ledger. Love without accounting. When Brenda married her husband, Paul, I helped them with the down payment on their first house. $12,000. I didn't ask for it back. I didn't ask to be thanked in any particular way. I asked only that they let me visit on holidays and that they teach my grandchildren my biscuit recipe. When Carl got into trouble with credit card debt in his late 20s, the kind of trouble that happens when a young man earns good money and spends better, I paid off $9,000 of it without telling anyone else in the family. I sat across from him at my kitchen table and I said, "This is a one-time thing, and you are going to learn from it, and we are never going to talk about it again." And we never did. When Douglas got sick the second winter before he died, a health scare that turned out to be nothing serious but felt serious for about 3 weeks, it was Brenda who held my hand while we waited for the test results. She was 34 years old and she held my hand the way I used to hold hers when she was small, and I thought, this is worth everything. All the long nights, all the extra shifts at the restaurant, all the years of doing without. This moment is worth all of it. I believed in my family. I trusted them with the closest parts of myself. I trusted them with my future. That is a significant thing to understand, because it means what came later was not the wound of a stranger. It was something much older, much deeper. It was the kind of hurt that can only reach you if you first loved someone entirely. I gave without keeping track. That was the rule I gave myself, no ledger. Love without accounting. Things don't change all at once. That is the thing nobody warns you about. If it happened all at once, you would see it clearly and you would act. But it happens the way the seasons change, gradually, almost imperceptibly, 1 degree at a time, until one morning you realize the leaves are all on the ground and you can't remember exactly when they fell. It started, I think, about 3 years after Douglas died, maybe 2.5. Brenda and Paul were doing well financially by then. Paul had gotten a promotion and they had moved to a bigger house in a nice neighborhood north of Houston. Their kids were growing. Their life had expanded. And I noticed, slowly, that my place in that expanding life was not growing with it. The phone calls got shorter, not dramatically, just shorter. We used to talk on Sunday evenings for an hour, sometimes more. Then it became 30 minutes, then 15. Then it was texts mostly, quick updates, photos of the grandchildren, a funny thing one of the kids said at school. All fine things, but not the same as a voice, not the same as sitting with someone. The holiday visits changed too. I used to host Thanksgiving every year. My table. My food. Douglas and I had done it together, and when he was gone, I kept doing it alone because it was the thing I knew how to do, and because Thanksgiving at Grandma's house was a thing I wanted my grandchildren to carry with them into adulthood the way I carry the memory of my own grandmother's table. The first year after the shift, Paul suggested they host. He has a bigger dining room, he said. It made sense logistically. I agreed. I brought my cornbread dressing because no one else knows how to make it right. That was fine. But the following year, they made plans with Paul's family in Dallas, and I wasn't included, and I found out 3 days before the holiday. Carl was spending Thanksgiving with his girlfriend's family that year, which was also perfectly reasonable. I spent Thanksgiving alone that year. I made a small turkey breast and a box of stuffing, and I watched an old movie I'd seen 30 times, and I told myself it was fine. It was not fine, but I told myself it was, because what else do you do? Little things accumulated, an invitation forgotten, a school play I wasn't told about until after the fact, a family trip that happened, and I saw the photos on Facebook the week after 3 days in San Antonio, the grandchildren at the river walk, everyone smiling, and I had not known it was happening. I told myself these were oversights. People get busy. I understood busy. I had lived busy for 40 years. About 18 months before the birthday, Paul and Brenda came to visit, not a planned visit, a spontaneous one, and they sat at my kitchen table and said they needed to talk about some financial planning. Douglas had left me a modest life insurance policy on top of the retirement account, and it had been sitting in a standard savings account earning almost nothing. Paul, who works in finance, who has strong opinions about where money should and should not live, suggested I move it into a managed account. He had a colleague he trusted. It would be better for me long-term. He talked for a long time. He used words I mostly understood and some I had to nod through. And Brenda sat beside him and nodded along, and at one point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "Mom, we just want to make sure you're protected." I want to be accurate here. They did not steal from me that day. What happened that day was that I, in a moment of trust, gave Paul shared access to monitor my account. Not to control it, not to withdraw from it, just to see. Just so he could keep an eye on things and advise me, because he knew about these matters and I did not, and he was my son-in-law, and Brenda was beside him with her hand over mine, and I trusted them both. That was the door I opened. And once a door is open, you can't always predict who will walk through it or what they will carry out. I am going to be careful about how I say this next part, because I am not a vindictive woman and I don't want to be misunderstood. I am not saying my daughter is a villain. I am not saying Paul is purely evil. I am saying that people who love money more than they should will find ways to justify the things they do. And the people they do those things to are often the people who trusted them most. After I gave Paul view access to my accounts, I didn't think much about it. He sent me an email once in a while with suggestions, moving some money to a higher yield savings, adjusting the allocation in my retirement account. Small things, helpful things. I followed his advice most of the time because it seemed reasonable and because I was tired of making financial decisions alone. Then, about 8 months after I gave him access, I noticed something small, an automatic transfer I didn't remember setting up. A small amount, $300, moved from my main account to a secondary savings account I had opened years ago and rarely used. I called my bank, and they said it had been set up as an automatic transfer. I thought I must have done it myself and forgotten. I canceled it and didn't think about it further. 2 months later, I noticed it again. Another transfer, different amount. I canceled that one too. I mentioned it to Brenda in passing on one of our short Sunday calls. She said she'd have Paul look into it. He called me the next evening and said it looked like a glitch in the system, some kind of old instruction that kept reactivating. He said he'd handle it. He did not handle it. But I didn't know that yet. What I did notice, in the months leading up to my birthday, was the way Paul spoke to me when I was around. It wasn't unkind, exactly. It was the way someone speaks to a child who asks about complicated adult matters, patient, gently condescending, careful, as though you might misunderstand any word longer than 2 syllables. He started calling me Miss Rhett at some point, which might have seemed affectionate to an outside ear, but there was something about the way he said it that felt like a category. Like I had been filed away under a label and the label said, harmless, limited, manageable. Carl was harder to read. My son has always been emotionally sparse in the way some men raised in Texas are sparse. Not cold, exactly, but contained. He doesn't offer things easily. You have to know how to look for them. And what I was reading in him in the year before the birthday was avoidance. Not cruelty, not active hostility. Just a way of looking past me when we were in the same room, of answering questions without asking any in return, of being present in the body while being absent in every way that matters. I noticed these things the way you notice a smell in a house. At first you wonder if it's real, then you start looking for the source. I found the source on the night of my birthday. He started calling me Miss Rhett at some point. It might have seemed affectionate to an outside ear, but it felt like a category. Like I had been filed under a label: harmless, limited, manageable. Let me go back to that kitchen. I got home at 8:40 in the evening. My feet hurt. My back ached from sitting at an angle in that draft chair for 2 hours. I had a piece of my own birthday cake wrapped in a paper towel in my purse because no one had thought to box up a slice for me, and I had wrapped it myself while they were saying goodbye to each other in the front hallway. I put the cake on the counter. I put the kettle on. I sat down at the table and I looked at my hands for a minute, just looked at them. 64-year-old hands, spotted, a little swollen at the knuckles, the wedding ring from Douglas on my right hand where I moved it 3 years after he died. Capable hands, hands that had done a lot of work. The chamomile tea steeping, I opened my banking app. I do this every first of the month. It is a habit V had since Douglas died, a way of keeping myself oriented, of knowing where I stand. The 3rd of the month was 2 days away. I was a little early, but I opened it anyway. The first thing I noticed was the balance in my main checking account. It was lower than it should have been. Not dramatically, not the kind of number that makes you put your hand over your mouth, but lower, maybe $800 lower than my mental accounting said it should be. I looked at the recent transactions. A grocery run, an electric bill, a copay from my doctor's visit 3 weeks ago, all expected. And then a transfer. Out. To an account I did not recognize, not the secondary savings I'd opened years ago, a different account entirely. The routing number was unfamiliar. The amount was $420. The date was 11 days ago. I scrolled back further. There was another one, 6 weeks before that, $380, same unfamiliar account. I scrolled back further still. Another one, 6 weeks before that, and before that. Going back, I am not sure how far back I would have had to scroll to find where it started, because by the time I had counted 4 of these transfers, my hands were shaking and I had to put the phone down on the table and breathe for a moment. I picked it back up. I looked at the authorized users section of my account. Paul's access was still there, listed as a view and advisory user, which is what I had authorized. But below that, and I read this 3 times because I thought perhaps I was misreading, below that, listed as a secondary account holder with transfer privileges, was a name I did not recognize. A woman's name. One I had never heard. I sat with that for a very long time. My tea went cold. The kitchen was quiet. The clock on the microwave said 9:17. Outside, a car passed slowly on the street, its headlights moving across the ceiling. I could hear the pecan tree in the backyard moving slightly in the night wind. I thought about all of it, the shortened phone calls, the Thanksgiving I spent alone, the chair by the garage door, the way Paul said "Miss Rhett" with that particular gentleness that wasn't gentle at all, the canceled transfers that kept reappearing. The account I hadn't opened, with a name I didn't know, with my money flowing quietly into it like water draining through a crack I hadn't found yet. I did not cry. I want to say that clearly. I did not cry, not because I wasn't wounded, I was deeply wounded, but because crying felt like the wrong answer. Crying felt like something you did when you were helpless, and I was not helpless. I was sitting at my own kitchen table in my own paid-off house with my own capable hands, and I was going to think clearly about what came next. I put the phone face down on the table. I let myself be still for exactly 5 minutes. I know it was 5 minutes because I watched the clock. Then I picked the phone back up. I did not call Brenda. That might seem strange to you. Your first instinct when you find something wrong is often to call the person you're closest to, and Brenda was my daughter. But I sat with it for those 5 minutes, and I understood, with the cold clarity you get when the emotion hasn't arrived yet, when you're still in the space between seeing the thing and feeling it, that calling Brenda was probably calling the problem. I didn't know exactly what I was dealing with yet. I had suspicions. I had evidence that pointed in a direction I did not want to name out loud. But I had not yet gathered what I would need to understand the full shape of it. And the first rule of a situation like this, A rule I learned from 32 years of keeping books for other people is that you do not move before you know what you're looking at. So instead of calling Brenda, I did something I was glad I had the presence of mind to do. I took screenshots, methodically. Every transaction I didn't recognize, going back as far as the app would let me. The unfamiliar account number. The unauthorized secondary account holder. All of it. I sent those screenshots to my own email address, which I access from my laptop, which Paul has never touched and which uses a password he does not know. Then I went to bed. Not because I was calm. I was not calm. I lay in the dark with my eyes open and my mind moving fast through everything I knew and everything I needed to find out. But I went to bed because it was almost 10 o'clock and because whatever had been happening for months, and it would still be there in the morning, and I needed my thinking to be sharp. I slept for about 4 hours. Shallow, fragmented sleep. I woke at 3 in the morning to the sound of a neighbor's dog, and I lay there in the dark with Douglas's side of the bed empty beside me, still empty after 7 years. I have never been able to sleep in the middle, and I thought about what I would do. I thought about my Mo. She worked for 31 years pressing other people's clothes, and she never complained out loud. I used to wonder when I was younger why she didn't speak up more. I understand now that she was waiting. She was watching. She was keeping her own account of things, in her own mind, in the private ledger that nobody else can open. And when the time came to act, she acted. I am her daughter. I knew how to wait. In the morning, I made coffee and I sat at the table and I opened my laptop. I had some research to do. I spent the morning of the day after my birthday on the phone and at my laptop. And I want to tell you about that morning because it was one of the most important mornings of the last several years of my life. The first call I made was to my bank. I asked to speak to a fraud specialist, not a general customer service representative. When I got one on the line, I described what I had found, the unfamiliar transfers, the account access I had not explicitly granted, the secondary account holder I did not recognize. I read them the name from my account portal. The specialist was quiet for a moment, and then she began asking careful, specific questions, and I answered all of them as clearly as I could. She told me a few things I needed to know. First, that my account showed an access log indicating that the advisory access I had granted Paul had been used not just to view the account, but to initiate some account management changes that I had not explicitly authorized. Second, that the secondary account holder listing was irregular and should not have been possible under my account type without my direct authorization in person at a branch, which had not occurred. Third, that they were flagging this for their fraud investigation team. I asked her what I should do in the meantime. She told me to change all my passwords immediately and to revoke all third-party access to my account, and to come into the branch at my earliest convenience to review and lock down my account permissions. She also told me that if I believed this might constitute financial exploitation, I could contact the Adult Protective Services Financial Crimes Unit or consult an attorney. I thanked her and I wrote down everything she said, in my careful bookkeeper's handwriting, in the small spiral notebook I keep by the phone. I changed my online banking password. I changed my email password. I changed the PIN on my debit card. I went into my account settings and I removed Paul's access entirely, every level of it, every permission, until his name appeared nowhere in my account documentation. Then I made a second call. To a friend of mine, a woman I've known since the early days of my first marriage, a woman named Dollars who worked for 20 years as a paralegal for a family law firm before she retired. I told Dollars what I had found. I did not editorialize. I did not embellish. I simply laid out the facts in order, the way I'd been trained to present financial data, clear, sequential, documented. Dollars was quiet for a long time after I finished. Then she said, "Rhett, I need you to do something for me. I need you to not say a word to either of your children about this until you've spoken to a real estate attorney and an estate planning attorney. Because if what you're describing is what I think it is, you need documentation before you need confrontation. I said, I already have the screenshots. She said, good girl. I made an appointment with a local attorney's office. Not a friend, not anyone connected to my family, just a licensed attorney with a clean Google review history and an office in a building I'd driven past for 15 years without ever needing to go inside. The appointment was set for 3 days later. In those 3 days, I gathered everything. Bank statements going back 2 years, printed and organized by date, the screenshots, the email records of any correspondence I'd had with Paul about my finances, the original paperwork from when I'd granted him access, which I found in a manila folder in my filing cabinet under Financial Paul Advisory. I made 2 copies of everything. I kept one at home in a locked fireproof box I had purchased years ago for exactly this kind of document. I took the other set to Dolar's house and asked her to keep it for me. I also did something I had never done before in my life. I changed the locks on my house. Not because I thought anyone was going to break in, but because I had spare keys out there. Brenda had one, for emergencies, and I needed to know that my home was mine in a way I could feel. The locksmith came on the 2nd day, and when he handed me the new keys, I held them in my palm, and I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control, mine, quiet and solid in my hand. I told no one I had done it. I changed the locks on my house, not because I thought anyone was going to break in, but because I needed to know my home was mine in a wah. Why I could feel, I went to see the attorney on a Thursday morning. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she was about 40 years old with reading glasses pushed up on her head and a directness I liked immediately. I laid everything on her desk. She read through it carefully, taking her time, asking a question here and there, writing notes in a yellow legal pad. When she was done reading, she took off her glasses and set them on the desk and looked at me and said, "This is financial exploitation. I want to be clear about that so you understand what you're dealing with, not to frighten you. You have documented evidence of unauthorized transfers, improperly obtained account access, and a secondary account holder added without your consent. This is a civil matter and potentially a criminal one." I nodded. I had suspected as much. Having it named was both worse and better. Worse because it was confirmed, better because the thing that is named is the thing you can fight. Margaret walked me through my options. I could pursue a civil suit for recovery of the transferred funds. I could file a report with the State Attorney General's Financial Crimes Unit. I could involve local law enforcement. And in the shorter term, she strongly advised me to make some structural changes to my assets, not because they were in immediate danger, but because what had happened suggested a pattern, and patterns have a way of continuing until they are stopped. We spent 2.5 hours together that morning. When I left, I had a clear list of actions and a second appointment for the following week. Over the next 3 weeks, I moved quietly and with great deliberateness. I moved the bulk of my savings out of the joint accessible account and into a new account at a different bank. One Paul had never heard of, one that existed only in my knowledge and Dolar's, one with no shared access of any kind. I updated my estate documents. I had a new will drawn up. I contacted a financial advisor, a fee-only advisor, someone who works for me and not for a commission, and I restructured my retirement allocation under her guidance. I went through my house and I made a careful inventory of everything of value: Douglas's watch, my mother's pearl earrings, the small collection of savings bonds I'd been buying for my grandchildren since each one was born. I photographed everything. I documented everything. I was thorough in the way a woman who kept books for 32 years knows how to be thorough. And I did not tell Brenda, I did not tell Carl, I did not pick up the phone and unburden myself. I kept everything inside me and I kept moving. Dolar's called me one evening during those 3 weeks and asked how I was holding up. I said I was fine. She said, "I know you are, but I'm asking how you feel." I sat with that for a moment, then I said, Like I've been asleep and I'm awake now. Not a good feeling exactly, but a clear one. She understood what I meant. By the end of those 3 weeks, every piece of my financial life that could be protected had been protected. The evidence had been compiled and delivered to the State Attorney General's Office Financial Exploitation Unit. The attorney was preparing the civil recovery claim. The accounts were restructured. The access was revoked. The locks were changed. I had been sitting by the garage door. Now I was sitting in my own house with all the doors locked, and the only key was in my hand. I called Brenda on a Sunday afternoon, about 3.5 weeks after my birthday. I chose Sunday deliberately. Sunday is quiet. Paul is usually watching football. She is usually alone in the kitchen folding laundry or making something for the week ahead. I wanted her alone. She answered on the third ring in the slightly distracted voice that tells you someone is in the middle of something. She said, "Hey, Mom," and in those 2 words I could hear the casual ease of someone who does not know a storm is coming. I said, "I need to talk to you about something important, and I need you to listen to me without interrupting until I'm done." There was a brief pause, then she said, "Okay," in a different voice, a careful voice. I told her what I had found. Not everything, not all the legal and financial details, not the case number or the attorney's name, but the substance of it, the unauthorized transfers, the account access that had been used for things beyond what I had authorized. The name I did not recognize on my account. I laid it out clearly and without dramatics, the way you read a financial statement, line by line, date by date, dollar by dollar. When I finished, there was a silence that went on long enough that I thought she might have put the phone down. Then she said, in a voice I had never quite heard from her before, a voice that was partly her and partly something frightened, she said, "Mom, I didn't know all of it." I said, "I believe you didn't know all of it, but you knew some. Of it, Brenda, and you let it go on." Another silence. "I don't know what Paul was doing exactly," she said. "He told me it was just restructuring, that it was for your benefit, that you weren't managing things well and he was." "He told you I wasn't managing things well," I said. She didn't answer. "Brenda," I said, "I paid off my house. I put 2 children through school largely on my own. I kept books for a dental practice for 15 years. I managed the estate paperwork when Douglas died without asking a single person for help. I have never missed a bill payment in my adult life. Does that sound like a woman who can't manage her finances?" She was crying by then. I could hear it. Quietly, the way she always cried, no drama, just a soft leaking of something that had been held too long. I did not comfort her. I want to be honest about that. I listened to her cry, and I felt the weight of it, and I let it sit there between us. Then I said, "I love you. I have loved you since before you were born, and I will love you until the day I leave this earth. That has not changed. But what happened is not acceptable, and I need you to understand that there are now legal processes underway that I cannot and will not stop. Whatever happens between you and Paul because of this is between you and Paul. My job now is to protect myself, and that is what I am doing." I asked about Carl separately in a different call that evening. Carl was different from Brenda, quieter about his guilt, less able to articulate it. He didn't know the full scope of what Paul had done, that much was clear. But he had known something wasn't right and he had chosen to look away. That, too, is a choice. Looking away is a choice. I told him the same thing I'd told Brenda. I love you. What happened is not acceptable. The rest is in the hands of the appropriate people. I hung up both calls feeling something I hadn't expected. Not relief exactly. And not grief either, though grief was in there somewhere. What I felt was something more like return. Like I had come back to myself after a long absence, and my house was exactly as I had left it, smaller, quieter, but mine. The weeks that followed were not easy. I want to be honest about that, too. There is a kind of story where the woman stands up for herself and everything falls into place beautifully. And the people who wronged her are contrite and apologetic, and the family is restored. And there is a warm, golden scene at the end where everyone is seated properly at the table. The chair by the garage door used only for extra guests. That is not quite how it went. Brenda and Paul are still together. I don't fully understand that. I'm her mother, and there are things about a marriage that a mother cannot see into, and I have learned late. But I have learned not to speak about things I cannot fully see. She called me several times in those first weeks. The calls were difficult in a way our calls had not been in a long time, full of the particular pain that happens when something that was unsaid is finally said and now has to be reckoned with. She said Paul had returned the transferred amounts, not all at once and not without prodding, but they were returned. My attorney confirmed that against the civil claim we had filed. The state investigation was ongoing. I don't know how it will conclude. These things take time. I had to accept that the resolution, legally, would unfold on its own schedule and not mine. Paul has not called me, not once. I did not expect him to, and I did not need him to. Carl came to see me about 6 weeks after the phone call. He drove 3 hours from San Antonio, where he lives, and he arrived on a Saturday morning, and he stood at my door, the newly locked door, the door whose key he no longer had, and he rang the doorbell. I let him in. We sat in the kitchen, the same kitchen where I had sat up that birthday night with my cold tea, and he talked for a long time, and then he ran out of words, and he sat there looking at his hands. He said, "I'm sorry, Mom." I said, "I know you are." He said, "I don't know why I didn't say anything. I knew something was off. I think I just didn't want to deal with it." I said, "That's the most honest thing you've said to me in a few years." We sat together for most of that day. We ate soup at lunch, a pot I'd made the day before, beef and vegetable, the kind I've been making since he was 7 years old. He washed the bowls without being asked. We watched a football game in the afternoon and didn't talk much, but the silence was a different quality of silence than it had been for the last several years. Present instead of absent. I do not know if my relationship with Brenda will fully recover. I think it can. I think it will require time and honesty and a willingness on both our parts to hold the difficult things without pretending they aren't heavy. I think it will require me to let her grow into a more complete you. Understanding of what happened without me standing over it with a disappointed face. And it will require her to understand that what she allowed, however passively, was a form of betrayal. And that love, real love, means protecting people even when it's inconvenient. These are not simple lessons. They don't arrive cleanly wrapped. But they are real ones, and we are working on them slowly, the way two people build a bridge. Both sides moving toward the middle, neither one sure exactly where they'll meet. My finances are in the best shape they've been in years. My new financial advisor and I meet quarterly. My accounts are organized, protected, and earning appropriately. The will is updated. The beneficiary designations are updated. Nothing is ambiguous. Nothing is undefended. I sleep well now, most nights. I have a friend, not Dollars, a different one, a woman named Gloria I met years ago at a church women's group, who asked me once, after I'd told her a version of what happened, if I was bitter. I thought about it seriously before I answered, because bitterness is a real thing that sneaks up on you, and I wanted to be honest with myself about whether it was living in me anywhere. I said not bitter, awake. There is a difference, and it matters. Bitter people stay angry at the thing that happened. They carry it forward into every new room they walk into. The anger becomes the story, and the story crowds out everything else. The good memories, the possibility of new things, the ability to be present in your own life. I have seen bitterness work on people the way rust works on iron. Slowly, and then all at once. What I am instead is awake. I see things clearly now that I was not seeing before. I see the way I was moving through my own life with a kind of trusting blindness that, while it came from a good place, left me vulnerable. I see the places where I gave without discernment, not too much love, that is never the problem, but too much practical access to the infrastructure of my life without pausing to ask whether the people I was giving it to had earned that particular trust. I see, too, the things I did right. I was not naive in the end. I was not helpless. When I found the evidence, I acted. I did not collapse. I did not call and cry and let my emotion get ahead of my strategy. I gathered information. I found experts. I protected myself. I moved carefully and without announcement, and I did not let the love I still had for my family cloud the actions I needed to take on my own behalf. That is something. That is, in fact, a great deal. In the months since all of this happened, I have started doing some things I hadn't done in years. I bought a small herb garden, just pots, nothing elaborate, a window shelf in the kitchen, and I grow basil and thyme and a little rosemary. Every morning I water it and it smells good and alive, and it is entirely mine. I joined a book club at the library. I started walking 3 mornings a week with Gloria, 2 miles around the neighborhood, early enough that the light is still gold and the streets are mostly quiet. Last April I drove to see the wildflowers in the hill country. I went alone, the way I've learned to go places alone, not as a consolation, not as second best, but as a real and deliberate choice. I drove with the windows down on the back roads, and there were bluebonnets all along the highway for miles, and I pulled over once and stood outside the car in the warm morning air and just looked at them for a while. Douglas would have loved that drive. He loved Texas Springs. I thought about him standing there beside me in the wind, looking at those flowers, and the thought was sad and warm at once. The way the best memories are, the ones that have settled into something permanent and bearable. I am healing. Not finished, but healing. And the work of healing, I've learned, is not about erasing what happened or arriving at a place where it doesn't matter. The work is about building yourself back up around it, not avoiding the wound but working alongside it, letting it teach you, letting it change the shape of how you move through the world without letting it define everything you do or feel from here on out. I am 64 years old. I have half my life behind me and, God willing, enough of it ahead to do the things that matter. I intend to do them well. Not bitter, awake, there is a difference. Bitter people stay angry at the thing that happened. What I am is awake. I see things clearly now that I was not seeing before. I am going to talk directly to you now. To whoever is sitting with this story, whether you are a woman my age or younger, whether you have children of your own or you are someone else's child, whether what I've described here sounds familiar from your own life or strange and distant and not applicable. I want to talk to you about what it means to be invisible inside your own family. Because that is the real story, not the money, though the money matters. Not the legal proceedings, though they were necessary. The real story is about the slow process by which a person, a capable, full, entire person, can be moved from the center of her own life to the chair by the garage door, and how that can happen so gradually that by the time you realize it, you've been sitting there for years, telling yourself you're fine, telling yourself the draft is not that cold, telling yourself you don't mind. I want to say to any woman reading this, you do not have to earn your seat. You do not have to perform helplessness to be loved, and you do not have to perform greatness to be worthy of a proper chair at the table. You are worthy by virtue of being. By virtue of the life you have lived, and the work you have done, and the love you have given, and the years of showing up. That is enough. That has always been enough. I want to say to the daughters and sons in the room, your parents are not diminishing. They are not becoming less. They are the same people who drove you to practices and stayed up with you when you were sick and handed you money when you needed it and answered the phone at 11 o'clock. The body changes. The energy slows, but the person is intact. The person has always been intact. Do not let someone into your life, a partner, a friend, an ambition, who teaches you to look past that person as though they are something you've already consumed and no longer need. I want to say to anyone of any age who has given trusted access to the infrastructure of their life, check it, regularly. Not with suspicion, not with paranoia, but with the ordinary vigilance that protects you. You worked for everything you have. Nobody has the right to move it without your full knowledge and your full consent. Not a spouse. Not a child. Not a child's spouse. Not anyone. It is yours, you earned it. You decide where it goes. And I want to say this last thing, which is perhaps the hardest one. Loving someone does not require you to be harmed by them. You can love your daughter fully and hold her accountable. You can love your son and tell him that looking away is still a choice. You can love your family and still close the accounts, change the locks, call the attorney, and sit in a legal office explaining to a stranger that you need someone in your corner. Love and protection are not opposites. They are supposed to be the same thing. I sat in that chair by the garage door. And then I went home and I found what was happening and I got up and I moved myself back to the table. Not their table. My table. The one in my own kitchen, with the light from the pecan tree coming through the window and my tea in my good cup and my 2 hands steady and capable in front of me. I moved myself back, and I have not left my seat since. If you stayed with me this long, thank you. I don't take it lightly. Your time and your attention are real things, and I'm grateful you gave them to me. If some part of this story felt familiar, I want you to know, you are not alone in it. There are more of us than you would think, women and men who have been moved to the edges of rooms they built, who have had pieces of their lives quietly managed without their full knowledge, who have wondered whether speaking up is worth the disruption. It is worth it every time. If there is a woman in your life, a mother, an aunt, a neighbor, a friend, who seems quieter lately, who seems to be moving to the margins, who you haven't really checked on in a while, check on her. Not with pity, with presence. Ask her how she really is, and then be quiet long enough to actually hear the answer. And if you are that woman, if you are reading this from your own kitchen table, with your own hands in your lap, with something unsettled in your chest that this story has named, I want to say directly to you, you are still the woman who did all of that. All those years of work, all those miles of showing up, all that love given and given and given. None of that has left your body. It is still in your hands. It is still yours. Come back to your table. Lock what needs locking. Call who needs calling. Keep your own records. And never, not for politeness, not for peace, not for any reason, let anyone sit you by the garage door again. That's all I wanted to say. God bless you. Good night.